Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and I am back with the second part of the epic building explosion tutorial. This time we're going to be creating the actual explosion in Mantaflow. Blender's old smoke simulator was pretty good and can pull off some pretty amazing stuff, but Mantaflow is way better, and it's also faster and you can get higher resolution results. So anyways, without messing around, let's jump right in and get started. First thing I'm going to do is open up the building file that we had from the last tutorial. I have gone and added a roof, which I think looks pretty nice, and you can do so if you want, or you can just download this building that I created and start from there. Once that is saved, we're going to go ahead and duplicate everything here so that we have a backup. So go ahead and select this whole building section. You don't need to select the floor, just the building. Hit Shift D and move it to a backup collection. We're going to call this backup. We're going to collapse that and turn it off. Then we're going to carefully go through and apply all the modifiers. So this doesn't have any modifiers on it, so we can hide it with H. That one's good. This one right here has a mirror and an array. Apply those. This has a mirror and an array. Apply that, and this one also has a mirror and an array. Then you can unhide everything, and we are going to start destroying the building. So I'm going to go Shift A, Mesh, add in an icosphere, and I'm going to turn this up to 4, I guess. Move this up the building, just to where you kind of want the explosion to go off from. I'm going to put it maybe right there. And we're going to move to frame 15. Scale this up. Scaling, and then let's go back to frame 10. Scale this significantly down, something like that. And then let's go to frame 16 and hit S0, scaling, just like that. So we have that. I'm going to add a displacement modifier to this. Select clouds, and we're going to turn this up a bit. And that looks pretty good. Set it to global so that as it moves, it sort of changes. Now go to frame 15 when it is at its biggest. Then I'm going to select all the building parts. Just like that. Tab into edit mode. Choose face select, and we're going to select kind of the area that this sphere is taking up. I'm going to hit Alt Z to turn on transparency mode, and then we're going to go C to circle select and just grab all of this. Move to a different angle and refine it. That looks decent to me. Tab into object mode. We have all of the selections saved in each object, but each object is still separate, and that is what we want. So let's go back to the first frame, and I'm going to select, I guess, the walls. Go P selection to separate it out, and then you can just hide that piece. Select the glass, and on the glass we want slightly more glass selected just because glass is more fragile. So just go in and manually select some extra glass. I mean, you can leave it if you want, but I'm going to select some extra pieces. And something like that looks good. P selection. Go ahead and hide that piece. Now I'm going to select the floors and P selection. Hide those. And then these pillars, you can instead of destroying these, I'm just going to delete some parts of them. So let's just go C to circle select, something like that, and X faces. Because I think these pillars would be strong enough mostly to withstand the blast. So now you can see what your building is going to look like when it is destroyed. If I switch to rendered view, yeah, that looks pretty cool. Let's add a material to these. Oh, I guess they have a material. Well, let's just turn their darkness down then. Add in a camera and then go Control Alt Numpad 0 and drag this back a bit. Now one thing cool we can do with the camera is if you hit Shift C and add in an empty sphere, scale this up quite a bit so we can actually see it. And then select the camera and shift select this empty sphere. Control P to object. Then what you can do is you can rotate this. Rotation. And then move to whatever you want the end frame to be. I'm going to go with maybe 200. I hope that's long enough. And rotate it. Now go over here and drag open a new window. Choose Graph Editor. While you are selected on the empty, go A, V, and vector. Close that, and you should have a nice smooth pan. So now let's start exploding stuff. I'm going to hit Alt H to unhide everything, and then we're going to work on the glass first, I guess. So if we go back to the beginning frame with Shift left arrow, click on the glass, and then go to your particle settings over here. I'm going to go to the frame where this explosion is just starting, so not right here, but the frame before that, frame 12, and Object, Quick Effects, and Quick Explode. If I turn this immediately up to 1000, what you're going to notice is that we just have a whole bunch of single windows exploding out, and that's pretty stupid. So let's tab into edit mode and subdivide this. I'm going to do it 3 times, and then I'm going to go add modifier, decimate, turn this down to at least 0.5. I'm going to go ahead and hit apply and tab into edit mode, and you can see that all of our windows have been essentially broken, pre-broken. They've got all these triangle-like patterns. So if we play this now, it looks a lot more like broken glass, which is exactly what we want. So let's go back to the beginning frame. And what I want to do is I want to put this glass on its own layer. I'm going to go Move, New Collection, and call this Glass. Hit OK. I'll put this above the backup layer. And it should have nothing but glass in it. Good. I'll name this piece Glass. Now what we want to do is duplicate this sphere. So I'm going to go Shift D and then move it to the glass layer. Let's turn off everything else at the moment. And I'm going to turn this thing's strength down. Turn the size of the noise texture significantly up. And hit apply. So now let's make sure this starts almost, yeah, something like that. Scaling. Now let's go to our physics properties and set this to collision, turn up the damping and the friction. Shift left arrow. Now you can see a bunch of the glass is getting blown out and away. Unfortunately, it's not enough. So let's mess with the animation here. We don't want it to get there before the glass has shattered. So maybe I'll start way back here. I'm going to turn its size down. We will have the glass explode just a little earlier. Something like frame 11. And then we'll make sure that on frame 11, this thing is smaller. I'm going to select both of these keyframes and drag them forward, and then go to this one and just keep scaling it up. If you go to your object properties here and go under viewport display and set it to wire, you should be able to see your glass a little better. So now let's go to our particle system, and I'm going to turn the field weight gravity down. Let's set to 0.2. Let's see how that works. Yep, it's still a little too fast. Let's try 0.1. Yeah, that's nice. It's better. I would still say it's probably a little too fast, but we're just going to go with that for now. Let's go to velocity and turn the randomized velocity up. Alright, so that's decent. It's not fantastic. Maybe I'll turn this down to 1. Something like that. Now let's turn the lifetime to 250. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is create a collision object that approximates the building. So let's add this collection back into the scene. So turn it back on. Go to the front view and add in a cube. I'm going to hit Alt G on this cube and tab GZ1. Scale it up so it's just barely the size of the building. Scale it on the X axis and then on the Z. Then go Control A and apply that scale. If you go to the front view and hit wire, maybe you can hide some of this, and that allows you to kind of see the hole in the building. So let's go Control R, add a loop here, a loop here, and then one here, and delete these faces, just like that. Then grab your edge select this face and hit F, F, and F. That should fill it in. Grab this, drag it over on the X axis. Drag this on the Z. And then maybe I'll hit J between those two. And J right here. It doesn't need to be a nice mesh. It just needs to be something that smoke and particles can collide with. So let's duplicate this and move it to the glass layer. Turn off the collection. Select that object and choose collision. Turn the damping and the friction up. Alt H to unhide the glass. So you can see some of the glass is getting stuck in the object like that. Select the whole cube and scale it on the y-axis. You're going to have to move this cube to the collection. So it is kind of annoying that all the glass bursts at once. If you want to try to cover that up, what you can do is you can add in a second sphere. So duplicate this one and drag all of this back so that as soon as the glass breaks, it has something to collide with. So double trouble there. If you go Alt-Shift-Z, it should hide both of the spheres, and you can see whether or not that looks natural. Now let's go ahead and go to the cache here and bake it. There you go. Now we're going to turn off the glass layer and go back to our collection. I'm going to grab the walls and the floors. And we're going to make a new collection, and I'll call this Other. That's everything else that is going to explode. Select this and duplicate it again. Move it to the other layer and then turn collection off, the main collection. I'm going to actually select this piece and scale it along the y-axis a little. So the glass exploded on frame 11, I think. Yep. And we want this building to explode somewhere around there. I'm going to select this smaller pressure object or whatever this is. I'm going to duplicate it and move it to the other layer. Turn off glass, object, quick effects, and quick explode. So if we look at this, kind of the same idea. It looks sort of ridiculous. Let's turn the amount of particles up. I'm going to go with 1,000 again. So again, we're having kind of the same problem, and that's that all of our geometry is super square and very neat looking. So let's tab into edit mode on this piece and subdivide it. Then let's go back to our decimate modifier. And let's set this to maybe 0.25 and apply that. Tab into edit mode and we have some very nasty looking geometry that is exactly what we want. So shift left arrow. There, it looks a lot better now. So let's turn these particles settings to be the same as the last one. So under field weights, gravity needs to be 0.1. And we get something more like that. I'm going to set the lifetime of these up to 250 as well. You can duplicate this if you want to. Drag it back, get a bigger version of it. Yeah, it looks fine. I'm going to select these particles, go under rotation, and now they should all be in the correct rotation, and then just choose normal and then dynamic. As they explode, they should start in the correct rotation and then slowly spin and turn. So let's bake this as well. I'm going to go cache and bake. Cool, that should be good. Yep, that explodes nicely. There's a bunch of nasty debris in there falling everywhere. So let's set this this piece we duplicated to collision, turn the damping and the friction up, and let's try that bake one more time just to see if it looks any better. We're going to delete the bake and then bake this cache. Okay, the last thing that we need to explode is the floors. So let's go to the same frame we exploded this stuff on, frame 12. Actually, let's do it on frame 11. Quick explode. And turn this amount up again to 1,000. Now, one problem we're having is that we're getting a bunch of floors together. Unfortunately, there's not really any way to get around that. I think it'll be okay though, especially if you set this high enough that there's no more than like 2 floors falling together. Right now we've got 3 right here, so let's set this to 2,000. Yeah, 2,000 is plenty. And I'm going to turn the gravity down again. Let's go 0.15. Shift left arrow. And yep, that looks like a lot of work to clean up. So set this to 200 again. What I might do is do the same thing I did for the glass. Duplicate this and offset it. Okay. Select your floors and bake that. If you want to have the second sphere take effect on these walls, you can do the same thing. I'm going to delete the bake and turn the amount of particles up here as well. So let's try 3000. Yeah, it just has more debris, and I like that better. So bake that. Alright, that looks pretty decent. Now I'm going to go back to our glass. Now that I see those exploding, what I want to do with the glass is slow it down even more because it's so small. So let's set this to 0.07. And then let's, I'm going to turn this amount up here to 5000. And bake again. Remember, if your computer can't handle it, that's completely fine. There's plenty of debris and just destroyed stuff here. There doesn't need to be that many glass particles. All this trash will mostly cover it up. So anyways, let's go to our camera and let's give this a render. I'm gonna first make sure that our collision objects cannot be rendered. So let's select them, go to their visibility here, and I'm just gonna turn off all this ray visibility. You can uncheck this as well, however, then you'll see them in viewport renders, and I don't want to see them in viewport renders. So let's turn off all that and turn collection back on. It also has a collision object. We're going to use that for the smoke. Turn that off. I'm going to turn on film transparency, just like that. So if I render this out now, it's going to look good. We've got a lot of destroyed stuff in there getting thrown around, but it doesn't look fantastic. It doesn't look as good as it could, and that's because there's no motion blur. Everything is just frozen in time. Go to slot 2, and I'm going to turn on motion blur. I might set this, I'll leave it at 0.5 and render image. Alright, so you can see what an insane difference that has made. A bunch of our objects are blurred out significantly, and it just looks a lot better than without motion blur. So now what you might do is you might go and set a destination folder, accept, and then we're going to save this, and we're going to do a viewport render. So I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-Z, and then let's go viewport and viewport render animation. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to give you an idea of what your animation is going to look like. It's going to show you that yes, the timing is all correct. There's nothing weird going on. I usually do these unless I'm really confident about the simulation, just because it's so easy to mess something up. So once you've got that rendered out, open up another instance of Blender, and we're going to go File, New, and Video Editing. Shift-A, Image. And we're going to get that image sequence that I just rendered out. Let's go A to select everything, open image strip. And now you can play it here in hopefully 24 frames per second and see that the timing is all correct. There, now we're at 24. So I would say that this is a little fast, but I think I'm okay with that. I don't want people waiting around forever for the explosion to happen. So close that. Switch back to the main file and save it, and we're going to begin working on the actual simulation. So I'm going to hit Shift left arrow, and the first thing I want to do is add some particles in. So I'm going to go and grab this instance of our building, move it to a new collection, and we'll call this smoke. And yep, that's down here. I'm going to hide this. That. Let's turn off the glass and the other layer. Hide those and this and that. Then let's select this sphere. And let's go move to the smoke collection. Now I'm going to hit Alt-Shift-Z to turn our overlays back on. Shift-S, cursor to selected, and then add in a sphere. Scale this down. We are going to add some particles. Just like that. Let's start this at frame 10. End it at frame 14. And let's turn its random velocity up. I've got it at 14 and set the amount down to 20. Okay, that looks decent. Maybe 50. Yeah, that's nice. And I'm going to select this object and set it to collision. Collision, damping, and friction can be up significantly. These particles are going to be trailing some smoke behind them and looking cool. And then I think their lifetime is high enough, maybe 100. We'll set it up to 250. Save the file and add in a cube. Scale this up. Now set this cube so that the camera can get a nice explosion, but that there's nothing being wasted. There's no extra stuff being simulated. So move this forward, scale it down maybe. We don't want to simulate all the crap on the back of the building because there's just no point. The smaller it is, the higher res of an explosion you can have. So I'll scale it up on the Z. So now go over to your physics tab, select fluid and domain. This is a gas domain. Select this sphere and set it to fluid and choose flow. I'm going to choose inflow right here under flow behavior and then select initial velocity and then turn fire and smoke on. I'm going to set that to 32, turn adaptive domain on, then we're going to set this to 100 just for now. We're going to need to set it to 250 later to render out the whole animation, but just for testing I think 100 is fine. So one of the first things that we're going to need to do is set this object to a fluid and effector, and that will make it a collision by default. There's also guide, but we're not going to go into that in this tutorial. Then select your particles, choose fluid and flow. I'm going to choose geometry, inflow. Then under flow source, we're going to select particles and choose our particle system. And then we're going to turn on initial velocity, keep it pretty low. I'm going to go with 2. Now at the first frame, we're going to animate its size. I'm going to start at, I guess 1 is fine. And then before we get out of the domain, you want it to be significantly smaller. So set it to 0. That's going to give it its lowest value, and that's 0.1, and then hit I. So now select your domain and choose bake. Alright, so our simulation has finished baking, and if you play it, you'll notice there is a small problem. Our explosion is not over on the sphere where it should be. That's just one of the bugs that Mantaflow still has. Go ahead and free the data, and then set a new cache destination. Then once you've got that, I am going to change a couple settings. This sphere here needs to have its fuel turned up to 2. And its initial velocity turned up to 1.5. Yep, that looks good. And then we're going to go to our particles. And those are going to be substeps, need to be turned up to at least 2. And then I'm going to turn the density down to maybe 0.5. And the initial velocity can be something more like 0.3. So let's try baking that. The nice thing about Mantaflow is that at maybe 19 or 20 frames in, we can hit escape to pause it and play it back and look at how it's going, and then we can hit resume. And here we are with our simulation. If I play this, it looks pretty nice. The explosion looks really nice, the particles that blast out of it look really nice, and the fire fades nicely. You don't want the fire to last too long. It certainly isn't realistic. Of course, realistic is never what we're going to be going for. Cool always trumps realistic. I'm going to double tap R and pull back just a little bit so we can see more of this glorious explosion. And then we're going to start working on shading it. Now, before we shade it, I'm going to bake a higher resolution version of this explosion. So let's free this. Then once it's free, go ahead and turn this up. You can set it as high as you want. Mantaflow does support some pretty high resolution stuff. And then let's go ahead and bake this. Hey, so I'm going to stop in real quick here. This is Joel from the future, and basically what happens is I forgot to set the time scale down to 0.2, which means my explosion moves really fast while all the debris is moving slow, and the scale just looks kind of weird. So yeah, just go ahead and set your time scale down to 0.2, and you won't have to send yourself back in time to remind yourself to set it down to 0.2 like I'm doing here. Alright, so here I am back with the finished bake. You can see the explosion looks pretty nice. I baked it at 128 resolution divisions, and I think it is time to start shading it. Let's go to the camera view with 0. Let's go Control B and box select the camera so that only what's in the camera renders. I'm going to hit Alt H to unhide our building so we can see all of that. And then I'm going to select the domain. Go to the shader editor right here. Hit home on the camera, and we're going to add a new material. We'll just call this explosion, and I'm going to delete the default principled shader, and we can add in a principled volume if you want. However, I really don't like that node. I have never been able to get the amount of control I want out of it, so let's go ahead and add a mix shader. Then let's add a shader, volume scatter, and then volume absorption. Plug those in there. You can see that your entire cube becomes a big block of fog. So let's go Shift A, input and attribute. I'm going to type in density, and let's drag this FAC into the density here and into the density here. And immediately we've got a little explosion going on here. So let's add in a couple nodes in between this. I'm going to go converter, math node, plug that in, set it to multiply, and then converter color ramp. No matter how high resolution you turn up your smoke simulation, you're never going to really have the really crisp edges of a big explosion. The only way to get that is by cranking this up. If you turn that just slightly up, it's going to sharpen up the edges. So the next thing we're going to want to do is go to the volume settings here, and this step size is what's causing these weird rings, so let's set it to 0.05. And you can see immediately everything slows down, but the rings are a lot less. If you want them to be even less obvious, you can set it lower. Maybe we'll just leave it at 0.1 while we are doing the preview for this, or even higher, 0.2. I'm going to turn this math shader maybe to 200, something like that. And then we're going to go ahead and add another value in here. I'm going to set this really close to black. Select the white value and click maybe 3 times. Delete those two and drag this up close to make it sharper. So what this should do is allow there to be a light, not so dense smoke out here, and then a much denser smoke in here. Yep, and then I'm going to turn this back down to maybe 100. And you can see that the step size is really looking awful. The difference between 0.05 and 0.2 is very obvious when you have this much density. And let's add some color. I'm just going to set it to a slightly orange dark value. And then the absorption here is going to be significantly darker and also just slightly orange. So now let's work on the fire. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go Shift A, shader, add shader, and then add in an emission shader, plug that in right here. Then I'm going to duplicate this attribute node and set it to flame. Plug the color in right here. Choose converter, color ramp. And let's drag this forward a lot. Add another node in and set that on the outside and make it black. Just like that. Let's drag this node closer. And that looks pretty good. Now let's go Shift A and color, mix. I'm going to turn this strength up, set it to overlay, and then I'm going to add in a converter black body. Plug that in there, turn the overlay value all the way up, and you should get that. Looks nice. If you want to, I'm going to set this to 15 maybe. You can turn this temperature down and get the cliche red explosion. You can also use a color ramp to color it if you want to. Basically just hit M on the overlay to mute it and then add in a color ramp, a second color ramp, and then use this to control the colors. You might get a finer control using a second color ramp, but you know, really do whatever you want. So this explosion looks decent. It looks okay, but there's not a lot of detail here, not a lot to work with. What we need is some fine grain noise. Now, fortunately, Blender has a very handy way of doing that. Mantaflow in specific has a very neat way of doing that, and that is with a little feature called noise. So let's go over here and turn that on, and I'm going to start with a strength of 4 and a size of 1.5. Upres factor is 2, and there's only one noise method, and that's wavelet, and I think that should be good. So let's just try baking that. I'm just going to bake maybe 50 frames in, stop it, and check it and see how it's going. Alright, so I did a bake with some noise, and it has added some noise to our simulation. It has added a ton of noise, and it looks really fantastic, to be honest. However, it is a little too much noise, and I don't think it's going to work. I'm going to go free and set the strength down to maybe 2.5. And try that again. Bake noise. Alright, so that bake finished, and we've got our noise. It looks like a setting of strength at 2.5 and scale at 1.5 is really nice. That has taken our kind of low-res simulation and added some really nice detail to it that makes it look, I don't know, fairly realistic. Let's go ahead and render a couple frames from this. I'm going to turn on the glass and the other. Then I'm going to make sure that all of our collision objects aren't rendered. So these spheres need to be turned off. I'm going to go and uncheck all of their ray visibility. Hide that one and this one. Turn the ray visibility for those off. And I think that the one that's actually emitting the fireball also needs to be hidden. Yep. It looks pretty good. Like I said, I'm going to render a couple frames from this and see what it looks like. Alright, so I got some test frames rendered out. Here's the first one. The fire takes a little while to get started. You could keyframe the smoke so that it doesn't have any density until the, you know, explosion starts to need smoke. But I think I'm going to just leave it. I think it looks fine. This is the first frame. It's frame 15. Here we've got frame 20. And frame 30, the fire is mostly gone by now, and you can see everything just getting absolutely destroyed. And then what I did is I rendered out some 4K versions of this scene, and you can see that there's a lot of these ripples, like this this banding effect, and it does look pretty crappy. I mean, an otherwise awesome looking explosion has kind of been ruined by these. Basically what you're going to want to do is just turn the step size down like I showed you, and that will fix it, and you've got this. And the difference is very obvious, and the second one is much better. I think it is ready for a full animation render. You can see over here on a bunch of these renders that there's some noise, especially in the windows here. If you want to get rid of that noise, I just suggest using denoising. If you're going to do denoising, then you can actually turn the sample count down. Let's go under the view layer properties, and then I'm going to turn on color under this diffuse, and then normal. I'm going to turn the step size back to maybe 0.7. We don't need it that low, especially not for an animation. If I were to now render this, alright, so I rendered out this little bit of an image, and let's go to compositing. Check use nodes and then control shift click on this layer. I'm going to go shift A, and then we're going to search for denoise. Plug that in right here, and then we're going to grab this normal, plug it in there, and the albedo, and plug it in here. So then just make sure that you plug this into the composite, and we can remove that. Just go ahead and set a destination folder. Except I'm going to render it at 75% to give it that old blockbuster look, and then we're going to turn the density of the smoke down. Yeah, now we're going to just turn this down, so maybe he'll go 50. See what that looks like. if you want to get some nice volumetric lighting, you could turn this bounces up to 1. Last but not least is adding in an environment texture. If I uncheck transparent here, and you can kind of see what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and do a full render, and I will come back when it's done. Alright, so I rendered out the animation, and it was only after I rendered out the entire animation that I realized my smoke is moving way too fast. So what I'm going to have to do is set the time scale down to maybe 0.2, and then go ahead and bake that and then render it again. Basically, this just goes to show how important making a preview render can be. Anyways, once I did the final render, this is what I got. I modeled some more buildings and put them in the background. I also turned the darkness of the smoke down. Hopefully you can tell that Mantaflow is really powerful, especially that noise feature is going to allow you to get a lot of really nice detail on lower resolution simulations. Just be careful with the detail. It can get out of hand and a little out of control if you're not careful. Hopefully your explosion looks pretty epic. If it does, join the Iridesium community and post it there. I would absolutely love to see it. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. This is Iridesium.